Toasty.
July or January in here. There's no in between.
But we have Corona right now, so we can.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're not live. Are we live or would be a few minutes?
about 1 minute. Okay. I'm doing this for Melissa.
What's her name? Is not coming?
When's away?
No,
What's her name? Sylvia coming?
you don't know?
I checked her text.
I've not seen it in the text.
No, she's saying it to me. They just start.
So she may come or not.
Somebody to have it.
Again, if only it was for something important. I always forget my password.
You go.
Hi, Doreen, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Actually, because Maureen's gonna do her thing in here, maybe we do the public comment up,
Yeah, I'll do that. We just have nothing there. Yeah.
because instead of having,
You want us to keep it in order? Or?
well, otherwise it just, if you, this,
Okay, so maybe push this up to there
push it up above and,
to into the new fourth spot.
yeah.
Okay. Patrick, are we good?
Yes.
Okay, who's coming in? Hi. Welcome this evening. I'm going to call to order a regular meeting of the Hastings and Hudson Board of Education for December 5th, 2023. I'm going to start off with one particular announcement. Just want to note that we have a board member who is not here, Maureen Centeno, who's away out of the country. And also, we were to have a presentation this evening from a set of FMS middle schoolers. I don't know who might be here for that, but that they were not yet ready to present, so that's been moved to a later date. Just want to note that.
Student reps are out.
Oh, and also our student representatives are likewise engaged in 2 theater productions, so they would be there, but they're not. So, can I pull some of this stuff out, or do you want to
Yeah,
mention?
no, you can do it, go ahead.
Just in the announcements, I just want to point out, it's a busy season, obviously with the holidays coming up. There's recitals and the winter concert, and in particular this weekend, we have an absolutely wonderful play, Matilda. The 6th graders are putting it on, which is one of my favorite plays, so I had to mention it. So, it's an amazing, it's Royal Shakespeare, it's fantastic.
Awesome, but I wouldn't have seen you.
Just to
as
mention
the-
it. No, you should go, for sure. Moving on to update and district highlights from the superintendent. Is there anything you want to pull out of there, or it's noted on the agenda
Yeah,
here?
it's in the written record for the board and then the community following. I would just raise up that at the last meeting, the board heard from Angela Sanchez regarding the mental health clinic school-based, and then on Friday, the governor statewide made quite an announcement of quite a significant set of grants going to that. I think it's over $5 million, and in that list is Hastings for the partnership with Andrus. So I think it was really a plus that Angela Sanchez had us ahead of the game to be included in that whole process. So that relationship with Andrus, to have on site a licensed social worker as a complement to our existing personnel, not a replace at all. It's an important addition, is vital, and will be a benefit for both Farragut Middle School, the high school, and Hillside. And the last thing I would just stress is it's for all students. So while it came out of the special ed leadership, this is for all of our children. And witness the governor's leadership on this. Mental health for young people really is a major area of concern. And so it's good that we're able to be right in the mix on that initiative. I also flag in here the 2 searches underway. One's currently very active. That's for the high school principal to replace Lou, and that's mentioned in here in the record. But I also didn't then put into writing what we are doing right now and holding on the FMS search until we're done with the high school search. And if all goes well, board will be bringing to you on February 6th the recommended new high school principal. You'll have an executive session opportunity ahead of that. And if we're on that timeline for February 6th, which really feels like tomorrow, that'll be plenty of time to go into a very healthy search for the middle school principal. And we know with applications closing tomorrow for the high school, we have a good sense we're going to see in that process potential candidates for the FMS position. So we're not standing still, if you will. Those are the main things I would raise up for you. The other thing, the last thing is we are working on the calendar for 24-25 thanks to Melissa DeLiber's work. The superintendents in the region coordinate quite a bit. There was some confidential sharing of calendars Friday, and amongst 30 or so of us, we agreed we would not talk calendar in this month, December. We would begin talking about it in January, and indeed, we're still waiting for a few key dates. So even if we had talked about it with you at the next meeting, it would have been a bit preliminary. We are thinking quite strongly about doing a survey that would be going out to all families, potentially our students, not the elementary, but middle school, high school we're thinking, but certainly families. And it'll be modeled a lot on the survey Ardsley did last year. So it's not a short survey, but it's an efficient one, and it will give us, you as a board, good guidance, not a vote. Surveys aren't votes, but it give you good guidance in thinking about that process. And we hope you'd be able to vote in February on the calendar, which would still be a bit early. So that's my final update. And again, the rest of it's in writing, and you can see other updates, particularly school level updates, which I would emphasize you spend a little bit of time with. All right.
And the count last year, we did it also in February, or was even ahead of the game? Even?
Often you voted in April. Right. I think we got it to March last year. I'd have to go back and look.
No, that sounds right.
And we've been assured by BOCE's leadership, Southern Westchester, they'll try and give us their dates by the end of this month. We did, I think today got the preliminary Regents dates. They still stamp it preliminary, but those affect the calendar a bit.
And the dates, sorry, they've already, what about New York State? Because it's also influences the calendar. You already got that.
Those are the preliminary ones we received today from
BOCE.
Yeah, well, the BOCEs are waiting on, but for the New York State Department of Ed.
That gives us our end date, right?
Yeah, the Regents date.
Okay.
And they have, they've mandated Lunar New Year be included, and we will be building that in. There was some thought Friday amongst the superintendents that there could be another mandate coming down, and that as early as this immediate school year. But that's guesswork, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Dr. Szymanski, our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction. Any highlights you want to pull out?
Sure. Mine are memorialized and they're within the public content, but there were a couple of things I wanted to flag. The portrait work is moving forward in implementation in a number of key areas, but I did want to mention the Behavioral Charter Committee has been working together, and we've met multiple times, and so our work is really around what a behavioral charter is, why it's important, and the steps that we'll take to include the voice of students and faculty members in the creation process. So building off of Ruler, which comes out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, again, really aligned with that social emotional learning, that mental health focus, is this idea of how do we want to feel in our learning environment, and then what are the specific behaviors that we want to commit to amplifying those feelings in the learning environment. And then finally, as I mentioned in an earlier presentation this year about the portrait, those discipline codes will also serve as the basis for the third part, which is what happens if we're not behaving in ways that really lead to the feelings we want to be cultivating and the climate we want to be having, both within our building, within our learning spaces, and district-wide. So that is well underway. We're having a very good time creating and dreaming up ways to get additional input, so every voice is heard and valued, all staff members, all students, and so we are underway with that. And I also want to say a big thank you to our social studies department. Grades 5 through 12 have already started working together on their inquiry process. That's not only part of the curriculum review cycle, but it's also tied with the authentic learning opportunities action item associated with the portrait. And so we've begun with an inventory from an appreciative stance of what is it we're already doing very well that we would consider to be really strong in terms of exemplary, authentic learning opportunities for students, including the use of technology. And then the lens, once again, that the social studies department is going in through is thinking about how do we leverage AI to then move forward with the goal of authentic learning, specifically as it relates to the New York State social studies practices, because the state has both content expectations and expectations around practices. So we're moving forward. We're working closely. I actually had a call today with Greg Smith, department chairperson, Lou Pietro, Scott Wynn. We were all on a call with Leslie Accardo and Kelly Noka, who are our thought partners from the Lyric. And then we're thinking about some professional learning for the social studies department around AI that's really tailored to what we want to do as we're examining and building our curriculum. So many good things happening.
Excellent. Thank you.
Melissa, I have a question. When you say like discipline and behavior, do you mean like I'm disciplined about my work, or do you mean like
I mean the
looking at?
discipline codes. Thank you for asking. So each building has a specific discipline code that was developed over the summer, and that was what Scott had started the ball rolling on in terms of the presentation. Scott and Camila worked on that at the middle school. Are you talking about the behavioral chart?
Yeah, I'm trying. My question is around like, are we going to have to look at our policy, or is this totally something different?
Different.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're building off of the great work that was already done. So each building created those discipline codes, and it was both around what are some consequences and also what are the restorative practices that can be paired and associated, so that we are deliberately repairing any harm that's been potentially done while we're also creating a sense of accountability. So that's almost like that third corollary part to the behavioral charter, which is more of a promise of who we want to be in our learning environments. How do we want to feel on the playground, in the classroom, in the hallway, from building to building? And then the second part is like, well, what can we do and be empowered? So thinking about that portrait attribute, what can we do as empowered individuals and of our learning committee to help ourselves and others to feel those feelings? And then thirdly, if there's an infraction, we look at those discipline codes and we think about what's the restorative piece, and then if there needs to be an accountability piece from a consequence area, that's the third part.
Got it.
So if, correct me if I'm wrong, so there is the code of conduct that governs all the schools, but this is the operational piece
Right.
that is being implemented in order to bring the actionable code of conduct to bear, because that's, so
Right.
because you said it's something different, I don't want it to be misconstrued.
That's a good clarifying
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, it's we have the code of conduct and then there are the
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, to,
there's no connection,
to-
but there is a
yeah,
connection.
to act it out, we have our code of conduct. Then within that, we have the discipline codes for each of the three buildings. And the big step forward this summer is all three are now same language idea of code of conduct, disciplinary code. All of them have a step up in consequence. All of them emphasize restorative as a piece at that, not as a choice, but as a key piece in it. And that's all fitting within that larger frame of the code of conduct. And while the board still now does need to go back in to look at some modifications in the code of conduct, that's not going to affect what's already now in practice. And you may recall that when the middle school this summer took the lead in building this out, it wasn't simply the charting of the consequences and restorative, but there was a real framework of thinking about how do we care about behavior? How do we care about incentivizing and rewarding, the best types of behavior and the way we think we want to do that? And I think through this work, given we're going to be asking the board to, in May, look at a revised code of conduct, better schedule ahead of next year, by then there may be a few things within the code of conduct that we're saying should be modified. But we're in a good space that go full circle. The current code of conduct still is the appropriate guide for then what's being operationalized now. We're almost halfway through the year with those various codes.
I think it's very good, and just for clarity, even in terms of the restorative practice piece, in our policy meeting, you mentioned that it should be not a choice, and the leadership team, they were already working on it. So I just wanted to make sure we are not thinking it's two separate things. It's not. And just, I know, everyone's eyes are on this, but if I would share what I'm seeing, as we know, we just implemented the portrait, and we are working through a lot of work on race and all the other human protective rights work. And the way I see it is a construction space, right? Like when people reach out to me, that's how I describe it. So if there's a storm of hegemony that has created the tearing of these, that has created messy social structures, and now the storm has passed, nothing is legalized, how are we reconstructing and building? And what I see is a construction site. Like, remember before Hillside was cleaned up, right? And Maureen will be showing us stuff, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I'm not seeing any improvement. And I will reach out to her. So I say this to say that when feedback is being given, I just hope that we take it as a feedback and not as a way of, how do you call this?
Wrist slap?
A slap? No. So I just wish we do that, because I know we are all committed to this work, and thank you, Dr. Samansky, for giving us this update.
Yeah, and just so it was August 29th where you had that robust presentation. That's all in the public record in the documents in terms of the student behavior.
Correct.
So just so you can tie back to that.
Dr. Samansky, can I ask just a quick question? On the behavioral charter, like we have the district-wide code of conduct, and then we sort of have an operational one, which is building appropriate, which makes sense. Is the expectation that with behavioral charters we'll have a similar thing, where not an overarching thing per se, but there'll be a Hillside behavioral charter, and the sort of three things stitched together?
We think so, and so that was part of the conversation today. So the design through the action plan development committee that created this particular action plan, the intention was to have differentiated charters, differentiated promises that were appropriate for each building. What we've been processing together is to really make that decision well. We need more information. So we want to hear from the students, from the staff at each of the buildings, to think about some of those emotions in terms of the commitment of how we want to feel in these different spaces. And younger students arguably may identify with different emotions than older students may identify with. So we won't know until we get the information back. So the early intention is to have differentiated charters, but under the same coherent umbrella. But once again, we'll see once it comes back and we disaggregate it in February. If we stay on our timeline, this committee will be then looking at responses that are coming back and thinking about which way we want to go with that.
I have a question. Sorry. I had a clarifying question that I wanted to ask before Doreen asked that. One of the updates you had mentioned, staff and student voices. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what particular information? Like, I'm just wondering, you are taking staff and student voices, and what about teachers and students that their voices can only be heard through their parents, like IEP students and marginalized groups? How is that being?
Sure. So I can give an example of it being a phased approach. And so initially, the Behavioral Charter Committee came together, and they were, again, really focused on what the Behavioral Charter is and any kind of research-based approach that we wanted to take in terms of creating it and making sure that we were thinking about emotions and thinking about behaviors and a linkage from the social-emotional umbrella. After that happened, we agreed that what we wanted to do is a randomized selection of voice, that it would be totally random. And so I worked with our data coordinator to create like groups of people depending on their roles, including students and grades and buildings. And the first iteration of including students and additional faculty voices and additional administrative voices were a random selection, and that was by design of the original Action Plan Development Committee. And so we had another meeting where we all came together, and those individuals were invited to come participate and share their voice. And we started this first round of how do you want to feel in your learning environment. And they were in the room, and different stakeholders, different roles. The elementary school students, some participated from afar through an interview with Mr. LaRocco, and the emotion words got funneled back, and we explored them again with the committee. We had an 8th grader physically in the room, and we were moving Post-its around with all the emotions and grouping things and trying to figure out the nuances between those emotions and sorting and classifying, having really good conversations about which emotions are prerequisites for the others and really narrowing our list. And then to further answer your question, the next pass at this is making sure that we're being inclusive is it's designed to go out to all so that we get input from all. And thinking about that through a kindergarten through 2nd grade lens, and this is hot off the presses, like this idea that really earlier today, hot off the presses, that it's likely that in grades K through 2, it would be done as a class exercise through discussion. And also thinking about any students who would need that scaffold of the discussion, right? And from there, the input will come around which of these do we value most as a learning community. So it's phased, and we keep bringing in more and bringing in more and bringing in more.
I'll just say this and that's it on this topic. So I like the idea of randomization, but I'm just hoping that the kind of randomization will be stratified randomization. The only reason why I say that is that sometimes when randoms, like we use just pure randomization, it still will pick up a skewed group. And at this, because Hastings is committed to equity, it's important to identify the different categories. That is the process of stratified randomization, so that at least there is true diversity to the voices that led into it. Because sometimes those that catch the first fish are the ones that will jump in like let's say if we are saying, let's say we would randomly select the first 50, then it can be skewed. So I'm just hoping.
Yeah.
That's
Our
it.
goal is actually to get every voice. That's the goal right now. And this first small group was to really start the ball rolling on a subset of emotions for exploration, but it's really all is the goal. So knock wood, we're moving along. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Maureen Caraballo, business official. We're going to open up with some preliminary headlines, thematic stuff for the upcoming 24-25 budget. So,
Right,
welcome.
so this, can you
This
hear me?
will be here, right?
Yeah, so last meeting, we started kind of with the 24-25 conversation on the budget, and each week leading up to the actual budget, or every other week, we'll be providing different parts of the information, just so as we get closer to speaking about the proposed budget, we have some context about some of the drivers that are are going to be a challenge going into next year. Okay, so, sorry, is this working? It's not working. Oh, is it on?
Do you need a ticker?
Yeah, it's not working.
I'll just press it.
Oh, it did work? Okay. Oh, okay, thank you, Maris. Okay, so again, this is just the presentation overview. The first item tonight we're going to speak about is the tax cap calculation, and I did mention last week that we did receive one of the factors that is part of the calculation and how we determine each year what our allowable growth is. And then, again, we'll just speak to a couple other items tonight in regards to COVID funding and the impact that will have as we develop next year's budget. Again, reminding and going over some of our cost drivers, and then thinking about what topics that either we think would be important for the board to discuss and other things that you may want us to present more information on. Okay, is it working?
Next.
Yep, perfect, okay. So again, this is a preliminary calculation of the formula, and that is because we're still waiting on a few other factors that have some, will have some impact on this. This is pretty much in and around what we'll be able to levy. There may be a couple dollars in either direction depending on some other, and it's really to do with our capital levy exclusion. Those numbers, we do not have our final state aid, building aid numbers for next year, and that's plays into this formula a bit. But that being said, currently we are anticipating that our cap next year will be in around about a 3.8% increase on the allowable levy limit, which will allow us to, our allowable increase under that would be about 1.4 million. So with that, again, means is that on the actual tax levy, which is the portion in which is funded by local property taxes, in order to stay tax cap compliant, we would be able to levy an additional $1.4 million.
Maureen, sorry, what's,
Yes.
remind me again what pilots is?
Excuse me?
Pilots?
Oh, pilots. So pilots are payments in lieu of taxes.
Yeah.
And currently there are, I believe that's from one building in Hastings, and that are agreements that are made with developers to build within Hastings. I believe it is for the affordable housing property on Wilburn Avenue. That's the amount of taxes we receive for that building.
So why do we have to pay back out again?
So what happens
in
is
excess,
so the way the formula works, because pilots can vary from year to year. So you start with deducting out the amount you received last year, because there could be a new pilot coming on, and that would either increase or decrease the amount you can levy. So it is part of the formula because it is it's different than your typical levy amount, because those are based on agreements. So there's a time in which they expire, and there's a time in which they can change, and also you could have some so meaning that pilots can have after 10 years time, they would be added to the rolls and then pay like regular taxes based on the value.
So are these numbers like fairly standard year to year?
Those are, because there's not a lot of property that
And it's
has
low,
pilots.
I know, I'm just curious.
Yeah, but in certain places, it's a statewide formula. So in places, say like Yonkers, that has a lot of incentives and a lot of pilots that are provided to incentivize building, those numbers could be in the millions of dollars. And so whether it's $1, for some districts, or 2 million, it's part of how you calculate your limit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next, thank you. So again, starting off with where we kind of get a sense of what our allowable growth is. And then this is something that, this is the first upcoming year in which those COVID dollars that we've been receiving since the onset of the pandemic, those dollars are now coming to an end. And as you can see, what I did on the top of this slide is I really just listed out the various grants and the dollars associated with each of those that we received during the COVID from 2020. Some of these monies, and I tried to notate next to it, some of them had, as an example, the first one, which is the ARP grant, it had, we received 257,000 that we were allowed to use over the course of 3 years' time. And again, you'll see under that where there were different grant amounts, some very small dollars and some large dollars, such as the CARES ESSER grant, in which we were allotted 1.3 million. What's important to note here is that there was some one-time type expenditures that were we used for these dollars, such as different construction projects. We had done some air quality upgrades, yes, that's the word, upgrades, and there were many, I mean, now to think about it, all those plastic screens that we bought that, I don't even know where they are in the building, but I mean, as you could imagine, they were very expensive, and technology and different things that were allowable expenses. But in addition to that, we, as required, many of these grants were targeted to help support students with either additional teachers, intervention supports, additional behavioralists, and things such as that. And what you'll see listed on the bottom of this slide is the current year allocation of some of these positions that we have created through the pandemic that were to support students throughout this time. And now that monies are going away, we will then, if we want to continue with these items, which I imagine that's the plan, those then will have to be incorporated into the budget. So just that alone will add, as we look at that $1.4 million we're allowed, we are already starting in a place in which we need to pick up some of these expenses that were previously grant funded, which is outside of our general fund budget. Yeah.
Just a quick question just
Sure.
on that point. In the same way that some of the funding is rolling off,
Correct.
it's pandemic related, it's rolling off, are there any sort of interventions or supports which are related to the pandemic that we're also going to roll off, or is this the whole set that's going to continue?
So, yes, that's a great question. So I think currently, and that's where you'll see, as an example, if you look at the dollars on the bottom, they exceed the 230 to 250,000 that we're suggesting
Okay.
needs to be funded in the budget. So the first three items listed there are things in which they already currently existed in part, and we were able to either expand those roles. The DEI coordinator, we did already have that position partially funded, and it was an expansion to allow that to be full-time, and some of the others. So those top three items we see as being to be needed and will need to continue. And they were, quite frankly, some of those needs existed prior to the pandemic, but I think the dollars that we received allowed us to either create them or expand them. As far as the part-time contract for the Hillside behavioralists, this is something that was really, I think we would love to see it continue, but currently we're not carrying that over. It was something that with they were seeing increased behaviors with students and things such as that, so this was a direct intervention. And currently that would not be, that was more related to the pandemic, and although I think I know Amy will love to see continue, currently we're not rolling that in. And then the additional support for students, we're anticipating a drop down of that number, but still having to have some dollars in there. And though that last line is not for students with mandated support, this would be for students that maybe did not have an IEP or have it anywhere. So it was like additional things that were offered to students.
Additional support to students at all three schools?
At all three schools. Mostly probably at the elementary and middle mostly.
The need existed more at elementary and middle. It was earmarked as direct supplemental instruction. So when we were thinking about the data that was coming out of STAR, we were thinking about a summer learning program at Hillside. So it went more there.
Yeah.
I thought that the math intervention came from something else. Did it?
There's
Well, part of it,
partial
yeah.
funding from Title I grant.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, so will we still have that for next year? So we could still have in other words, if we didn't fund this, right, we could still have a part-time Hillside math intervention and a 0.6 math intervention at FMS? Because we still have that Title IX money?
There there's no intention of reducing the math intervention.
Right, I'm saying, I guess my question is,
No, there wouldn't
Title
be
IX is
enough.
still
There
going to
would
pay for
be-
half of it,
It wouldn't pay for
It
half
doesn't
the
pay for
right now,
the
it
whole
only pays for a
but
portion.
it pays for
It
part
pays
of
for like a
it.
point two of it, yeah.
Right. So also, I'm wondering if the behaviorist is important, perhaps I know you want to keep everything, right? But have we thought about, in terms of what's best for the students, in terms of needs, like, because the DEI coordinator, for instance, and one of the math interventionists basically equals the Hillside behaviorist. And so in terms of the needs for the students, is the behaviorist more important? I know it's hard to say what's more important than what's not more important.
Yeah, if I may, what I'd suggest, we're giving you a preliminary look here, and I think when we can bring forward it in a coherent, systematic way, I wouldn't want to have trade-offs starting in that group of 5. I think it's writ large with the budget, what we bring forward as a recommendation. I mean, I think you can give some feedback as you're doing now, board, all of you, as to some valuing here, but then when we bring you the recommended budget in February, we can factor in where we are. What we're indicating now is that the relative need we already understand, that the positions we've had, the math interventionists at both levels, the DEI coordinator, those are quite significant, and we can weigh thoughts as it relates to the others, but it wouldn't be just mixing and matching from here. We would have to go in and make other reductions, though. Let me be clear. I mean, the budget's going to be very tight. So if there's a decision made to hold on to the behaviorist and we don't want to take it from these 3, we'd have to go elsewhere to find that money.
Right.
But I just want to be clear, we're not looking to mix and match out of this 5.
Got it.
As opposed to when we're going back to, and we're still building it, build the entire recommendation for you. We'll have to look at, where to get additional monies if there's a valuing of that behaviorist position, or right now, the more, in this listing, general statement of additional support.
Got it.
But-
Right, and I would just say also, I mean, some of them, at least with the math interventionists, you have students that either now are required to receive MTSS or RTI and things such as that. So I think now, it's not to say the need, I think it was trying to answer Alex's question. I think those needs still exist and probably existed before. And I think arguably, like, although the money's gone away, the students are still probably need that additional support after the pandemic. But we just wanted to kind of highlight and put it in some type of, currently we have a sense of, there's a minimal amount of those things that we need to move over.
And let me go to the key, what the work is, and as opposed to the line item. So we have to determine, do we value the DEI work, and what's that going to cost us? We'll bring that back to you in the full budget. The math intervention work we think is essential. We've been behind in math. We found ways to begin to catch up through the interventionist, so we think that's important. The behaviorists, we may pick that work up in other ways.
Well, we have the Andrus.
Andrus is one piece, but we have other ways we've been looking at how to support children's behavior in a positive direction. So I think what we can do is we build out, as opposed to pegging to that 150 and then that 125, is how is our budget in general advancing DEI, advancing quality math work, advancing good behavioral support, rather than getting zeroed in on these line items.
Got it.
Yeah.
I just want to say one more, and again, just because I did speak to Amy about this position today. So I think, as Bill said, this may be part of a larger budget picture in which they may find trade-offs or come with a recommendation. But the behavioralist does also work with staff to kind of turnkey some of that. So it's somewhat direct student support, and it's also to support our monitors and aides and teacher assistants and how they're helping the children with their conflicts that are happening at the playground and things such as that. So there is a piece that I think wouldn't necessarily be at the same level, because part of their work is to train our staff. So that is a bit different than just working directly with students.
Yeah, I wanted to just add a kind of perspective to it as well. So I know this is a school about the academics, and I don't even like to use the word DEI, only because of the political stuff about it. So I like to use the term human protective rights. That's the facts. There are human protective rights on race, color, sex, orientation, gender, age, all those different things that somehow the public school being a social space is impacting kids, that is impacting their academics. I believe that, and these three items that has to be part of the operational budget as recommended is essential, because if we don't have expert input, and some of you have heard me say this, and I say that all the time, regardless of the well-meaning, the wrong output would result from it. I'm a scientist, I can't teach English. You get what I'm trying to say? Like, teaching English, I'll make everybody dyslexic and they'll be writing wrong words. I promise you that. I'm not an expert in it, although I learn it, I'm familiar with it. I may be well-intentioned, but I cannot teach it because that's not my area of expertise. And in recent times, as you all know, New York State is making culturally responsive, equitable work mandatory. So, and I just want to this is not about an individual, this is about the position, and we pass a DI policy that requires that kind of expert input in making sure as the holistic child is ready to learn the academics. So I'm fully in support of these first three, not for it to be trade-off, but for us to if make it part of the operational budget, because DI work has started in this district a long time. It predates we had different names for it. And we've been toying it with people's well-intentions, empathy changing to sympathy, this happening and that. So I think that removing an individual by looking at the position as expert input, we need a mathematician to get the math going. We need an expert in human protective rights work, which is very sensitive, which requires that equity, so that when there is anything, the board can engage with that individual and say that I'm seeing certain outcomes that I'm concerned about. Because like you said, my child came home saying that I like blue dress or whatever you've said before, and also my child is coming out saying other things, so that we have that expert person who is supposed to deal with the curriculum and the behavior in that regard. Regardless of how they operate it, that's okay, but we need that operational piece to be part of this institution. So
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting.
I like that part.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting we get rid of it. I was asking that's why I was asking if we, like, it sounded, my understanding from what Maureen was saying was that we can't fund them all, so we have to figure out what's more important. And then I hear Amy Casas says that the behaviorist is really important and she wouldn't want to get rid of it. So I'm like, how can we do it? Because if that was my question, that's why I was asking about the math intervention and how we were funding it, because, that way we still would have, for instance, maybe they would tell me half a math interventionist at Hillside is plenty. And that half a DEI coordinator position is plenty. Maybe they would say that. And that's why I was asking, like, what's the best thing for the kids based on but it sounds like that's not how we're looking at it. It's not that we have to pick and choose from these. We're going to try to figure it all out.
It's also
But yeah,
early in the process.
that wasn't my suggestion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those points will.
But I think I wrote myself 2 sidebar notes, so if everyone finds my book and finds a bracket, that's a sidebar. So the plus is we've done some early testing with you. The downside is we've done some early testing with you out of context. So I think what I'm getting back is we will bring back to you a budget where we are going to try and build in the DEI fully funded, and you as a board will talk about that in context.
Right.
We will bring back the math interventionists, and you can talk about that in context. We will figure out a way to bring back supports for behavioral pieces. It may not be that particular line position. Organizations are great at grabbing a line and never letting go of the line, even though it may be a better way to get the work done. All right, so I just, and Amy would agree with me if she was sitting here. So I think there may be better ways to get the work done within existing dollars. So we'll come back with you, in a sense, with those values addressed. And then you can look at the whole thing in context to figure out, is this an affordable budget within the limits that the tax cap provides? Is
Got
that a
it.
fair summary?
Yes.
That's a fair,
Okay.
we're done.
Thanks, Bill.
Next slide.
Next slide.
Okay, again, each year we look at this, and this is, again, just, I think, helpful information as we are looking at our budget, and just to remind or show or everyone where we were this year in terms of enrollments at each building, and at Hillside, you'll see that currently we have 29 sections, K4. Next year, it looks, looking at current projection numbers, that although there's a shift in where those sections sit, we're, again, anticipating 29 sections next year. And this is something, as we, I think we put on an earlier slide in terms of cost drivers, which of course class size is a major cost driver. So, in the last probably over 5 to 10 years, and especially definitely since the pandemic, we are now seeing, or we're trying to adhere to, better class sizes or lower class sizes actually everywhere. And we're kind of, as you can see right now, based on our projections.
Well, this
I think-
projection for Hillside is really good, I think, in terms of class size.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, that's a way in which, we're currently planning. We're not looking to cut. We're not looking to cut back on that. And, we want to maintain that. So, but in terms of, cost, there is a cost in, having these, preferable class sizes. But again, not that we're necessarily increasing, but we are planning that we will be we're not reducing any sections at Hillside for this upcoming year.
But the interesting thing from this, based on your projections, though, Maureen, is that it looks like the overall enrollment of Hillside is lower, but that's only because the grade 4, which is one of the largest, is leaving. In reality, each of those classes is going up by 3 to 6 kids.
Right.
And if that's a trend moving forward that you think you're seeing, then that would be difficult for us, I think. I don't know if that you see that as a trend happening, but.
Yeah, so what happens is when we do our payroll, our enrollment projections, we look at live birth data and we look at sales data, but it also, our K-1 numbers, and probably the last 10 years, we are, seeing that growth. And actually, these are relatively modest projections, meaning that some models show that growth to be a little bit larger. Again, 2-3 students in either direction. So nothing that would necessarily have a significant impact on what we're showing for class sizes. But currently, we are showing a modest growth of our enrollment at Hillside, 7 students. But then overall, we are seeing those trends where we're picking up anywhere between 3 to, at times, 8 to 10 students at a particular grade level from year to year. So
Yeah.
sometimes, those are kind of outliers, the 10, but we typically are seeing, we're not seeing the numbers go down. We're definitely seeing
Right.
those cohorts grow. Sometimes where there was, you pointed out the current 4th grade, or actually the current 3rd grade cohort, where when they started in kindergarten, they were like less than 100. Now they're
Yeah.
up to 124. So we are consistently seeing students come in at 1st grade, 2nd grade, kind of throughout the elementary and right into the middle, quite frankly. But, we're not necessarily, we definitely, the last few years have been seeing, a bump from K to 1 and 1 to 2, so.
Right, and if my memory is correct, then we normally have mostly 5 sections per grade.
No,
And
6. We've been having
Rarely do
6.
we have 6.
No,
No.
we've been having 6. That's
been a
really
while. We have?
what pushed the addition at Hillside, is when we started to
Yeah.
get at that 6. I think we actually had 7 sections in either the 3rd or 4th grade a few years back.
Really?
So, yeah.
I don't remember that.
And that
Okay.
does not include the communications classes that are also they're represented in terms of, they're not on this actually chart. It depends. Some of the children are rolled into a grade level, some are ungraded, so depending upon, where they fall. But in addition to those sections, there's also 2 additional sections that run of communications.
Yeah.
So it's really 31 classrooms operating at Hillside, and we anticipate that to be the same next year.
What's the maximum classrooms we can have at Hillside?
Well, because there's specials run, so I think we may have like 1 additional, like 1 or 2 additional classrooms. So currently, I know that STEM, although it's, there's a classroom space within the Learning Commons, they also have a separate classroom space. So if in fact we needed to break an additional section, that would be a classroom that could be, brought back
Captured.
or captured. And then there's one other classroom space that's available.
So we really can't get any bigger.
Right, no, not too much bigger. Two classrooms bigger.
Yeah.
than-
And that's with taking STEM away, so.
Yeah. Well, that would be that they would then share the learning commons space. But I
Yeah.
think they have the flex
It
now.
wouldn't be taking it away.
Right, no, it would not. But I think that, I believe she teaches in both spaces right now, but for different, purposes. She, and maybe if the library media specialist is doing something, she may use the classroom, so. But currently, we have I would say 2 classrooms that, we could expand if, as an example, next year, one of our hillside sections is 5, if that went to 6, we'd have a classroom, and then if one needed to be at 7, then we would we would be able to accommodate that as well.
Okay.
Yes, Bill?
May I add something on the enrollment, or are you ready?
I'm ready. You go.
I may just hit a few key themes to be
Okay.
thinking about. So we have 567 projected for next year at Hillside. We know that 90% of our children at Hillside move all the way up through. So as we think about the bond side of the discussion, which is not this budget, and we think about the expansion of this facility, I'm going to go to a second number, then bring back that number. You can see we only shrink by projected, my math helped me, 17 students in what's an overcrowded building. Let's be honest.
You're talking about the middle school now?
Yes,
Okay.
but so meaning we're overcrowded at 520, but we have coming up the pipeline as
Right.
many as 567 children, roughly defined. So you can see the good news is people want to be in Hastings and are staying. The mixed news is we've got a middle school that we really got to think about expanding this space no matter what we may do down the road as it relates to where the 5th grade is located. Because you just can see what's in the pipeline here. And again, the upside here is that whomever's arriving K1, and we have, they are here, which is wonderful. By the time you hit 12th grade, the vast majority are here. And then the other thematic thing to look at is we have a bump up in the rising 9th graders next year. We do have some drops in the older grades in the high school next year, how much we can, work to mix and match. But we may have some issues there to be thinking about. So when you see the recommended budget, there may be some FTE pieces.
Right.
There's the bottom line I'm going towards. You may see some FTE adjustments driven by where the enrollment is, in part at the middle school related to what we had to do this year with math, right? 3 math classes of over 30-plus students. We just can't let that continue. And then at the high school, this larger 9th grade, and if we can't find a way to adjust faculty and staffing for that 9th grade coverage, but we'll work hard to be very efficient for you, but those are themes just to be ready for,
Right.
if that's helpful.
Right, because as Bill was saying, I think K-5, we know that, the sections are, what you see is the average, right? But when you get into, when it gets departmentalized, how that breaks out, and that's why although we have 6 sections 8th grade, and that would technically average between 24 and 25, depending on what the student's schedule and their needs are, that's where you get those kind of different bumps of 30 and depending on the math and some of those other subjects. And as we look at the high school next year, although it appears that the graduating 138 in the current 12th grade, which will be replaced with an incoming, right now, flat 146, 8th grade to 9th, which we do sometimes see some of our 8th graders go to private. And then
Yeah.
we also do.
I think there were
kids
like,
go back.
there's usually like 10 kids who go to private, and how many is it usually a wash? Like
No, it's a wash.
The
It's
amount that
definitely
go
a
to
wash. It's almost-
private is
yes,
made up by
yeah,
the amount that move
correct.
to Hastings.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then we
Or
usually.
come back, kids who are out and come back.
Right.
Yeah,
And we also
that's what I
get,
mean, like
and we also
programs.
get tuition paying
Yeah.
students at the high
Right.
school, so it
So
typically
Maureen, when
is
you
that.
look at these numbers,
Are we on the high school now? Yeah.
all
Sorry,
total.
Yes.
I was just
No, that's fine.
chasing
Yeah, I
the
know, you're like,
conversation.
you're doing a great job. I was watching as Bill was
Yeah,
popping back and forth.
I thought I was
You were-
clear, but it
you
wasn't
were doing
good for
great.
this.
Dr. Lang, you were doing a great job keeping up with it.
So I think we're at FMS.
Yes,
Sorry,
that's-
Jody, you had a
No,
question.
no, go ahead.
No, I don't have a
Oh,
question. I'm just.
I don't have a question. I was just going to say that, looking at these overall numbers, it seems like the overall numbers are up, I think, from certainly when my kids were in school.
Oh, definitely, yes.
And when I see people in the audience here who went to school
Yes,
in
yes,
Hastings,
yes.
probably way up from when some of them were. It's like 100,
Yeah.
75 to 100 more
Definitely,
enrollment,
yes,
which is a
yeah,
lot.
Yeah, and that's what we were seeing, I mean, and we've been consistently, although we were growing quite a bit, I think, prior to the pandemic, we went down a bit because people were
Yeah, we
either,
grew 'cause
when I say
people
people were
left
like
New
either
York.
pulling their students or going to private, I'm saying just in that 1 year, we saw kind
Yeah.
of that, but we are, again, back to that consistent kind of growth or flat and our projections are suggesting that'll just continue, like we'll be continuing to see, incoming kindergartens at over 100, where there were times in which they were like 80 or 85. So, and again, we are also seeing students come in across those grade levels. And again, not to say we know if this will materialize, but then with the governor's proposal of having, which I think is. my
Transit-oriented
understa-
development, or?
Yeah, so they're
Yeah.
kind of pushing development in places that have accessibility to transportation. So, I'm not saying it will happen tomorrow, but, there may be an impact if that, if we start seeing even a little bit of increases based upon that, which I think most districts are, like ourselves, that are close to those areas are anticipating some growth in the upcoming years, so.
Right, we have a limited amount of inventory right now in Hastings, and so if they start building more, our schools are gonna be in trouble. That's my big concern here.
Right.
I see the numbers go up every year, and we simply can't have any more. If we have new construction, we're done.
Yeah, that's true.
Maureen,
Yes.
I have a question.
Okay.
What is the number of students in Hastings compared to Ardsley, Nordops? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, I think it's ours about 2,300, I believe.
I would say
Yeah,
22,
22,
22,
2,200 or so. Yeah.
Ardsley is 23, 2,200?
Yeah, 22,
And
yeah.
we have in total
About
like
16,
16?
no, 1,600, yeah.
1,600.
Yeah,
So
16.
like, okay, so
Yeah.
600,
In district, and then
700
of course we have
more
students that, we have out of district, so it's like and then we also have tuition.
Just
out.
interesting, a lot of Ardsley land is not the village of Ardsley, it's town of Greenberg.
And Hartsdale too.
And Hartsdale,
Addresses
so,
are-
right, and then a lot of Hartsdale, so there's been a lot of construction that happened very rapidly in that area because it doesn't have to go through a village process, it just goes through town of Greenberg. So there's been a lot of rental and condominium units that very quickly got built in. That's why, because I want to say 10 years ago, it was basically the same size as us, but it just came up a lot real fast. Yeah.
When I was there, the elementary was 6 or 7 sections per grade level, and we saw a rapid increase while I was over there, up to about 950 students at the elementary school.
Wow.
Thank you.
And again, we'll just end with the, if we just go to the high school slide, Dr. Lund. So again, just to flag what Bill was mentioning, because the 9th grade students, they, by the time you're in 12th grade, some of them they've made most of their requirements. So even though the high school enrollment appears relatively flat, that does not necessarily mean a flat staffing model, because the incoming 9th grade, that's that current 8th grade cohort that we couldn't split because of space and all the rest. As they come into 9th grade, we may need to address those like larger sections of math and in some of the subjects, because that will require more teaching because they have full schedules in 9th grade, unlike the 12th graders who typically only have, unless they're taking electives,
right.
a lot of 12th graders only have a few
Study
classes because
hall,
they've
right.
already, finished most of their requirements. So that's where sometimes in numbers that look relatively flat, it doesn't always mean flat.
That's interesting, actually.
Yeah.
So, and especially when you get into high school, if you're talking about any differentiated learning,
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
the additional wrinkle. It's
Yep.
hidden
Right.
inside the numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, not to keep belaboring the point, but when we talk about even space and things such as that, especially at Hillside, it's also like programs and things like that beyond the enrollment, there could be, whether it be special education or STEM that didn't exist, 20, 15 years ago, and different programs such as that then once they become, embedded in the curriculum, you need space to have those, and there are times in which like increases are, not always as easily you would say, we're good at the high school, but that may not be the case, so.
And are we going to try to figure out what we're going to do next year? I think maybe Melissa or Bill, you had mentioned this about, to your point, Bill, about the math, the fact that algebra in 8th grade, there's like, what are there, 3 sections and there are 30 kids per section just because we don't have the space. And of all classes, that's a super hard class for a lot of kids. And I'm sure it's difficult for the teachers to have to try to teach a complicated subject to that many students. Are we for next year, we're going to try to figure out like what that looks like or what the testing looks like for getting into the 8th grade algebra or any of that?
Yeah, so the assessment piece has already been actively looked at, and it's a work in progress. And in terms of number of sections, number of students, I mean, ideally, we want to be able to have more students entering Algebra 1. So we're looking at that in the intersection with scheduling and FTE implications. So there are discussions already starting to happen around that, but we just don't have a resolution yet.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So Mackenzie was going to say something.
Oh,
No, I'm
sorry.
fine, we can go on.
Yeah, And then just the final slide, and this, again, is just kind of overall part of the enrollment discussion. Again, within those different sections, there's also ICT sections, and depending upon students, what's recommended for a particular student, even moving from one grade to the next, I'm already hearing some possibility of a need to split some additional or create some additional ICT sections, because again, where if there's a particular section, and although the legal limit may be 12, typically that's not where districts run them. So as we get cuspy with some of those numbers, where I think, and that is currently happening I know definitely at the elementary, in addition, although you're not seeing large overall enrollments from grade to grade, there may be a need to increase FTEs based upon sections of ICT because of student need.
And if I may, that first bullet may be very obvious to this board and community. It's not obvious to a lot of places. There are really two basic calculations in building a school budget, because for special ed, for ethical and moral reasons, it's based on what every single particular student needs. For the gen ed students, you can budget based on groups. You can budget based on, here's what, it comes back to how many want an elective that might serve 12 children. Whereas you may need to have a particular expense for sped tied to that one student. And when you have that awareness as a board and a community, then a lot of else logic fits to say, here's why certain costs are there because of the moral and ethical educational needs on the sped, whereas we can do the gen ed more in a grouping calculation, if I'm clear. So I just want to reemphasize why that first bullet is there as a recall. Just remember that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
Can I just
Sure,
about
of
what
course.
you mentioned? It's interesting because what you said is that, there's a legal state limit on ICT, you said 12, right? But through practice, we know that's not really a great place to be at, so we try to run it, I think 8 is sort of our soft
8
number,
is our
right?
cut number, yeah.
So again, it's sort of like one of those hidden, people always look at the headline number, how many students, but that's even in a setting like at Hillside where they're cohorted, that's an additional sort of, hidden number, so to speak, that's a hidden need. So
Yeah, and that, of course, if that does emerge to be part of a recommendation, then, we then go in and we show where where the current sections are, similar to what we did with that chart, and then show where their growth is and why there'd be a recommendation. So, but again, we're in these kind of early phases where we're, hearing some things and seeing some numbers grow in our current numbers and what that impact will be then going to next year. Another example, although not special ed, this evening you're going to be approving an additional E&L teacher. I think we spoke about it next week. And again, that's just based on some newer students in the district. And then that's how quickly something can, change or, need to be addressed in the budget. So.
I think these ICT classes are so important, and keeping that number down is so important. I hope I personally, if you need to, I would love to look at a budget that includes whatever is needed for that.
And I think as they also, it's for all the students in the class, not just the students. in
Exactly, I
special
love
ed,
it.
right? Yeah, so,
It's
yeah.
great for a million reasons.
Right, exactly.
I think the familiarity of students that do not have, no, I should say it appropriately. So there are anomalies, not abnormalities. So there are anomalies with every person. Every person has uniqueness, and I think the ICT allows for people to be exposed to other anomalies
100%.
that otherwise they
great
are
for-
not aware
yeah.
of in the society. And so it's not just for people that have other variabilities of their own physiology and anatomy. It's also helping other
It helps with
students.
empathy
helps
for
with empathy,
everybody.
everything.
They're
So,
great
yeah.
classes. I really
Well,
love them.
they also can't go anywhere. If a child is mandated to be in an ICT class, then it just has to exist.
Yeah,
Correct, exactly.
and it should be low numbers, I think, if we can. I mean, low number of students, not low number of classes.
Sorry, I moved it.
Oh, no, perfect. No, great, perfect. Again, so this is just, again, very preliminary numbers, discussion. We don't, there's things that are going to go up, go down, additions, subtractions. But just to get, again, when we look at, to go back to the allowable tax cap calculation, you look at, oh, well, you can grow your budget $1.4 million. It does, obviously $1.4 million is a good amount of money. But just this slide here just demonstrates how quickly those dollars, kind of get absorbed in that or are needed to address just the year-to-year increases in expenses. And again, I just try to summarize the ones that are the larger drivers for us, as they are for every district, and they include the pension system contributions. We already have been notified, and we knew that kind of from last year. It was indicated that the contribution level this year would be up, and so it's a percentage of total salary. So
9%?
well, yeah, it's going to 10, but 1% on $30 million is a lot of money. So, and then as salaries also grow, that's also right. So it's a double compound of it. So again, you can kind of see quickly how even just with the same level of staffing and just that change in contribution, that is about $350,000. Increase in health insurance costs, health insurance, we are self-insured, and although overall it is still it's a very good plan, it's a very overall well-priced plan, but like every other healthcare plan in the country, the expenses, they go up quite significantly each year. And, we've already been kind of told that, to anticipate, at least this level of increase, and quite frankly, it could be more. So, this is about a 4 or 5% change. And if it were to be more, or about 5%, so if it were to be more than that, then that number would just grow.
Wasn't it 5% last year?
It was 8% last year.
Can we, next time we see it, not now, I would love to just see the comparison and growth percentage-wise from year to year, so I know if something's like better than the previous year or worse than the previous year.
Sure. And as we have our actual budget presentations, we really do drill down and we give you the historical trends on these numbers and kind of to get you some sense of them. Again, step in salary increases. We currently, all of our contracts for most of our staff are already locked in for next year because we have agreed to contracts with all the unions. And the reason there's a range there, it is somewhat like depending on who is here. Sometimes we have a change in staff, so that somewhat blends these numbers. But we're looking at anywhere at the very low at 975 to about 1.2 million just in increases for all of our staff across the board. Again, just some other numbers. Like anything else, you buy all the things we buy for the school, and this is actually a very low number. It's probably not realistic, like just all the products we use and toilet paper and all the things that cleaning supplies and all the contracts that we are in across the board. We're going to have some level of increase there. Busing, we'll talk about that at a different time. And as we always do, we take a very good look at that each year. And as I mentioned earlier, in addition to that, we are anticipating needing to roll, we're currently rolling in those first 3 part-time positions or part of those positions into what we anticipate, we need to factor in for next year. So again, just looking at those things, we're at over about a $2 million growth. And currently, the way that would be, balanced just at a very, at looking at the budget right now, we did make a one-time larger interfund transfer next year, which we don't anticipate. So that'll help us a bit on the expenditure side. So between that and hopefully getting some increases in our revenues and possibly some retirements and such, we think we're like we'd be at a kind of a break even, probably we're a little bit in the red, but but as we mentioned earlier, if we need to hire additional teachers and all the rest, that will have to be factored or figured out in the in other things we may look to either reduce or not replace. Okay, and again, we put these slides at the very end, and not so much to go over them again this evening, but just to say, a review from our previous presentation, and we'll be looking throughout this process leading up to our budget at those 5-year projections for expenditure and revenues. And as we do gain better information and as we start to put together our actual budget proposal, we'll be updating those numbers, right? So that we haven't changed them yet because we don't actually have a full budget put together, but we'll keep refining those numbers and seeing what the impact of those numbers will be going out in the 5-year plan, as we always do. But if you do just as a reminder, what we looked at last time, you kind of can now see, and this was just a way that most districts kind of look at it. You can see that even in these models, we were anticipating around that $2 million growth. So it is pretty consistent because that we kind of know what our salaries are and those are, most of our budget is made up of salary and benefits. So it's like, we have contracts for those. So for the most part, we can anticipate what the growth will be. So that, I think, is about it. And again, we weren't planning on going through these tonight, but just, we're going to keep looking back at those as we continue on in our.
All right, and then so the next sort of headline date, I guess, late January 23rd, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
that's when we're.
Yeah, I think at that point, we will be bringing you back. At that point, we should have our preliminary state aid numbers, January 15th. Typically, they come out. That's gives us some sense, and that's helpful to us. And again, we, if there were to be either, just as a reminder, last year I think we had, I forget what the numbers now, I don't have in front of me, but we were about over $1 million worth of just, not the COVID aid, or regular state aid. We received about well over $1 million of increase in that line. So, hopefully if that number, which we're anticipating will be flat, but we just don't want it to go in the opposite direction at all.
Right.
So that's always something that's important for us to understand. And, unless the board wanted an update or something else between December 5th and January 23rd, that would be the next presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yep,
Good on
thanks,
questions?
Maureen.
You're welcome.
Moving on to public comment. Thank you all for being patient. Budget. If anybody's going to speak, I just want to remind people there's a 3-minute limit. Our clerk will mind the time for you. As well, please state your name and where you reside. And as well, just as a boilerplate on public comment, please respect that there's no discussion regarding individual district personnel or students. And persons wishing to discuss matters involving individual district personnel or students should present their comments or concerns to the superintendent during regular business hours. So if anybody would like to speak, now's the time. Oh, they wrote in. Okay, sure, of course.
Pat McGrath.
Oh, is the mic on? Just make sure.
Check, check, 1, 2.
I don't think it's on. Is it on?
Good evening, everyone.
Is it, Patrick, is that mic
I
on?
don't know if it's on.
Okay.
It doesn't
It is?
sound like it's on.
I think it's
Yeah,
on.
well, Patrick can hear it, because that's,
Yeah?
okay.
Yeah,
We're
you're
good?
good.
All right, hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Kat McGrath. I live at 130 Cochrane Avenue. Several of us will be reading this letter, which is signed by 101 district parents. A copy of this letter will be given to the clerk to be added to the minutes of this meeting. Dear members of the Board of Education, we are here both as parents and as members of Hastings Rainbow Families, a community group for Hastings families with LGBTQ plus parents and/or LGBTQ plus kids, and also Rainbow Families allies for all Hastings residents who support LGBTQ plus rights. We are here to speak truth to statements of misinformation made by Vice President Doreen Bucher at your October 11th meeting, when the district's partnership with Centerlane came up for a vote. Centerlane is the LGBTQ plus advocacy organization that works with our schools. Funding for the partnership was approved that night, and we are grateful for that. But prior to the vote, we were deeply disappointed to hear Ms. Buchner enter untrue and problematic statements into the record regarding the gender diversity lessons at Hillside. We were also disappointed that no other elected board member spoke up at that time to refute her statements or to defend the programming. Ms. Buchner said, quote, I was upset about a letter that went out to the Hillside parents a number of years ago that said that gender is how you like to dress and what you like to do, suggesting that if you like to do ballet, then perhaps you're not a boy, that maybe you should rethink about your gender. And so I think that is the confusing part, I think, for children to understand, end quote. First, Hillside at no point sent a letter suggesting that children rethink their gender based on their interests or clothing choices. This is in fact a direct contrast to one of the key points taught in these lessons, that all children should be able to pursue whatever interests and activities they enjoy, regardless of the gender stereotypes associated with those activities. In short, that your gender does not dictate your likes or interests. While any individual child's form of gender expression may include their choices around clothing and outward appearance, Hillside lessons have been very clear that there is no prescribed way to be a boy or a girl, or anywhere else on the gender spectrum. Hillside has been highly transparent about this curriculum, offering multiple parent workshops, Q&A sessions, and online tutorials, as well as being responsive to every individual parent who has reached out with questions. Our expectation is that any BOE member with questions about this curriculum would avail themselves of these resources before entering potentially inflammatory statements about this work into public record. Thank you.
I just want to remind, thank you, before we go on, that what I read initially, we cannot allow discussion regarding individual district personnel. This is an issue where we want to elevate what we're advocating for, but not personalize it, because we don't want to get in an argument. We want to hear what, bring that in here, but let's not attach it
It's not
directly
allowed to
Right.
mention names.
So please, thank you.
So including Euclid names?
Yeah.
Let me just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sure, no, I understand.
You can say a board member, but no names.
So you can
You can say a board member,
Okay,
but not the name.
My name is George Bushlands, by the way. I live at 86 Hillside, and I'm glad to be here. A board member went on to make claims that there is no research supporting lessons about gender identity at the early elementary level. This board member said, I saw the presentation too, and found some of it not so positive and a little disturbing myself. That's why I'm questioning them, essentially, coming back and what they're going to be teaching us. My concern is, when I see elementary and gender specific, middle and high school, I get it, they're growing, it's different. K through 12, it's very confusing. The whole subject is confusing. And there's no real scientific backing against what we're being taught that we should be teaching, end quote. We have this consensus papers from the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, all affirming clear empirical evidence that differences in gender identity in young children are valid, and that the recognition, acceptance, and community support of those different identities are critical and potentially life-saving. Fellow Hillside parent, pediatrician, and expert in gender-affirming care, Dr. Nancy Dodson, will be speaking further on this. Transgender and genderqueer youth do not magically appear in middle or high school. Research shows many are aware of their gender identity far earlier, typically during elementary school years, and frequently as early as kindergarten or younger, just like their cisgender peers. If we are not seeing many of them identifying publicly at a young age, often that is because they don't yet feel safe.
Thank you.
Hi, Laura Heisler, 45 Chestnut Drive. To any person listening who might say, I'm not saying transgender kids are disturbing, I just think teaching our children that trans children exist is disturbing, the impact is the same. Or why can't parents just decide for themselves in the privacy of their own homes whether or not to acknowledge trans kids exist and need support? Because the acknowledgement of our children's existence in their daily life in a public school is not a private matter. And to those who say, I don't really believe trans children exist. They are too young to make such a decision. It must be that they're being misguided by overly woke adults. We encourage you to spend some time getting to know an actual transgender or non-binary child. Many of us moved to Hastings specifically because of its reputation as a town that values kindness, inclusion, and diversity. My husband and I moved here precisely for this reason. We were looking for a town that would not merely tolerate our transgender child, but advocate for her. a town where she would feel believed, safe, and nurtured at school. Assigned male at birth, she was very clearly gender expansive from the time she was a toddler, choosing the silver sparkly shoes from the girl side of our local Carters and experimenting with dresses by nursery school. We made sure she knew that there are lots of little and big boys who like to wear sparkly shoes and dresses, that your clothes don't determine your gender. And we have since become family friends with several trans girls her age who prefer a sporty, more androgynous look. Gender identity is ultimately how we feel about ourselves on the inside. When she was still in kindergarten, my daughter told us that she was definitely a girl, and she has never wavered from this clarity. We moved to Hastings, and 2 weeks after she started school, Hillside rolled out their first gender diversity lesson. She heard herself affirmed. She felt safe to change her pronouns and her name a few months later. We met new friends, and at a play date, one of them, a poised 8-year-old who had just received Hillside's lesson as well, approached me and discreetly asked, "Excuse me, what are the preferred pronouns?" I could have cried. I felt so affirmed in our choice to move to Hastings. Regarding concerns around identity tribalism, while my daughter is super proud to be transgender and gave me permission to speak before the board tonight, I'm sure that she doesn't think it's even the 10th most interesting fact about herself. She loves performing evil Disney queens and crafting spooky stories and comic strips. Do you know why she has the mental bandwidth to explore these things? Because she has never had to spend all her energy fighting the world around her to be acknowledged for her very existence. Her identity being a given and one that is understood and nurtured by her peers, she gets to just be what she is, a happy 8-year-old kid.
Dorothy Nagel, 19 Terrace Drive. Another child's family, also members of Hastings Rainbow Families, would like to share the following. From our family's perspective, having the gender lessons at Hillside has helped create an environment where our child, who was gender expansive since kindergarten and transgender since the start of 2nd grade, was able to be accepted by his peers. I'm specifically noting my child's young age because I heard the BOE board members comment, specifically questioning the validity of having gender diversity education for children in K through 2. I'm here to tell them that children like mine do exist at a young age and do deserve the very same access to a welcoming and dignifying environment that I'm sure would be expected for their own children. Without my child's peers having this foundation of knowledge and acceptance, I fear that we would have had a very different and potentially quite damaging experience. End quote from that parent. All children benefit from receiving a gender-inclusive education at the elementary school level when they are first forming ideas around equity and inclusion. Teaching children that gender diversity exists is a critical part of the district's culturally responsive pedagogy, and it doesn't confuse them. Rather, it gives them language for what they already recognize to be true in their world, and frankly, they think it's no big deal. It's the grown-ups who get flustered. And teaching them that gender diversity exists doesn't make them all suddenly turn into transgender children, any more than teaching children about any other aspect of human rights. In 2022 alone, 26 anti-trans bills were signed into law in 13 states, setting a national record for the 3rd year in a row. Parents in those states are at risk of losing their children for offering them life-saving support. The Trevor Project estimates that more than 1.8 million LGBTQ+ youth seriously consider suicide every year, and at least one attempts it every 45 seconds. That's 10 young people since the time we began reading this letter. Trans and non-binary youth, in particular, are more than twice as likely to experience suicidal ideation and nearly 3 times as likely to attempt suicide than their cisgender peers. These rates are not because LGBTQ+ youth are somehow inherently more prone to these risks. Rather, it's because of mistreatment and stigmatization from society. Many of us have to end our day with these statistics in our head as we tuck our kids into bed. But there's real hope, because the research also shows that when you put those same kids in a nurturing environment, one that includes being surrounded by peers who acknowledge and affirm their identities, so that they are freed from the burden of having to explain themselves to the world around them every single day. That risk goes back down to normal.
My name is Sarah Parker. I live at 12 River Point Road here in Hastings. We ask the board to remember that in your decision-making, quite literally, the lives of our children are in your hands. We ask and expect the board to take your responsibility seriously. Asking questions is always welcome, especially in a rigorous learning environment like Hastings School District. But statements of fear, misinformation, or distrust in the incredible team of leaders who are educating our children, a team of people who continue to be transparent with their opportunities for parents to learn and understand alongside of them, won't be left unaddressed. We know we have allies on this board, and we thank you for your support, for your vote. In this inflamed climate, we ask you to also speak up when you hear untruths. We need your voice. We want to thank the wonderful staff at Hillside who have been leaders in this work for the past 3+ years. They are showing the rest of the county and the state how to do this work. And we also want to thank members of this board for their consistent, full-fronted advocacy for our district's LGBTQ+ children and for their immediate responses to statements that evening. And we're going to repeat some of their remarks because they bear repeating. Quote, "This is about inclusion and honoring and recognizing students wherever they're landing on the gender spectrum, and it's not about guiding or directing to get them to a particular place. We are honoring someone's humanity," end quote. Our kids are looking to see if we, the administrators, teachers, and grown-ups in Hastings, can meet our youth where they already are and where they are rightly pushing us to be, a town that affirms all of its citizens at every level in their beautiful and very real diversity. Thank you. This is signed the Hastings Rainbow Families and Hastings Rainbow Families Allies. And with the time that I have remaining, and you'll tell me when that ends, I'll read some of the individual signatories. Laura Heisler-Mitten, Jen Bonaventura, I need my pronunciation right, sorry. Dorothy Nagel, David Weinstein, Marco de Bonaventura, Andy Mitten, Leah Rubin Kadrain, Lindsay Weinstein, Whitney Burkowski, Jonathan Burkowski, Alexander Rizzio, Noah Solowitik, Jennifer Destin, Mia Johnson, Melissa DeLoe, Shayna DeLoe, Brian Harris, Patricio Paez, Emily Wardwell, Nicholas Duchek, Andy Nichols, Margaret White, Joe Seeley, Silke Baldor, Brian Baldor. I'll let him do this.
The alarm is...
Hi, my name is Andy Nichols. I live at 35 Mount Hope Boulevard, and I'm just going to continue reading these names. Dana Asher, Elizabeth Pincava, Michael Pincava, Maggie Sunowit, Diana Pan, Jeff Rosenberg, Emma Sobel, Caitlin Chang, Kai McMahon, Joanna Prisco, Yulia Perrin, Jesse Perrin, April Frost, Anna Triantafilou, Amber Weintraub, Owen Martin, Mark Haar, Catherine DiMartino, Dana Blanco, Lauren Berman, Keith Berman, Dan Buckley, Mackenzie Cadenhead, Jennifer Angel Green, Kenji Green, S. Elizabeth Batson, Jennifer Batson, Nancy Soma, Rich Chang, Aaron Rabichev, Morgan Ratcliffe, George Wishelms, Katie Rogers, Kate Adlin Bomarito, Laura Owens, Zoe Maliaros, Tom Kenny, Dimitri Grushko, Sandra Gladding, David Gladding, Ann Gunton, David Gunton, Nick Nikich, Matthew Nikich, Sarah Rubin, David Usdan, Howard Brenner, Donna Shepard, Laura Weitzman, Rachel Ratcliffe, Sarah Parker, Bessa Wilkerson, Eric Mansanis, Susanna Morrow, Marcel Buchescu, Kat McGrath, Patrick McConnell, Allison McCabe, Megan McCabe, Levi Hippisley Cox, Ann Lessie, Alexander Rabb, Kim Meissner, Thomas Meissner, Lexi Casano Antonellis, Jessica Casano Antonellis, Catherine Boothroyd, Mary Louise Miller, Alex Navarette, Janine Averill, Haicha Himmelnicki, Kate Solomon, Mike Solomon, Laura Glazer, Jill Serino, Tim Serino. Thank you.
Members of the board, my name is Pato Perez, and I live at 42 County Avenue. As of today, there are over 800 anti-LGBTQ bills that have been introduced in states across the country. The anti-LGBT climate is palpable. And this isn't theoretical, happening in faraway places. It's happening in our village, where twice in a row in 2022 and 2023, pride flags were defaced and our government failed to defend us. And now it's happening in our schools too. Uninformed and borderline bigoted comments, like those made by the board member in question, only propagate the hate for and the oppression of the LGBTQ plus community. This board is a public platform, and there are thousands of people who are tuned in to learn about your decisions. It is incredibly irresponsible of this board member to spread misinformation that encourages transphobia. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison McCabe, and I'm at 171 Rosedale. And actually have a PhD in this stuff, in cultural theory with specialization in gender and sexuality studies, but I'm not going to talk abstractly tonight. I am probably visibly to you a lesbian, a genderqueer lesbian. My family is a two-mom family. We moved here 10 years ago. We have 3 children in the school system. Our oldest is a trans girl. The youngest, right now, are cisgender. But who knows? We didn't move here, my wife and I, for our comfort. We moved here because we wanted to have what every parent wants for their child. We wanted to have a learning environment that was supportive of them academically and socially. It wasn't about us, it was about them. Because the thing that I have discovered as a parent is we don't know anything about who our children are going to be when they're babies, right? We just don't know. We have plans, we have hopes, we have dreams, we have things that we think, we look at glimpses of them. We only ever get a glimpse of the grown-up people that they're going to become. And you can try to force them to conform to your value system, whatever that is, or you can support them as they try and struggle to find out who they are and to find their place in this world. You can see I'm getting emotional. I don't normally come out for these events, but when I saw the video of the last meeting, I felt compelled to do that. Now you have seen the other parents in this room and how emotional they've gotten when speaking about this stuff. It's not about differences of opinion. What we're talking about is empathy and compassion for all children. Empathy and compassion for all children. If somebody doesn't understand what this curriculum is about, and they don't understand the motivations, and they don't understand how children experience gender and their sexual identity as children, I actually will say Google me. I am Googleable, ALLYSONMCCAVE, and I will sit down and I will have an honest conversation, a dialogue with you, and I will talk to you about this stuff. It's so important. It's so important because we all have to coexist in this world together, and it's not okay. Nobody is trying to recruit children. Nobody is trying to indoctrinate children. Nobody is trying to do anything for the children aside from giving them back a reflection of themselves and their value in this world. And if we fail to do that, we have failed at the most important job any of us will ever have. That's all I gotta say.
Hi, my name is Amy Nichols, 35 Mountain Boulevard. I'm a parent of 2 middle schoolers who both attended Hillside, and I'd like to share my comments regarding gender diversity education at Hillside. I also worked for Center Lane for several years, where I gave presentations on gender and sexuality topics and facilitated groups for LGBTQ youth and families. I fully endorse the letter from Rainbow Families and Allies, which I signed. And I appreciated having the opportunity to speak with a board member this past weekend to understand more about the context of her comments. I was very heartened to hear the board member express support for gender education at elementary school, and that her concerns with the distinction between gender expression and gender identity be made explicitly clear for both children and families. I fully agree with this point and did explain that both the lessons at Hillside and presentations to families were in fact making that distinction in clear and age-appropriate ways. I also shared that my impression from her comments at the October meeting was that she was not supportive of gender education at Hillside and distrustful of the school. The board member let me know she appreciated knowing my response and that it was not her intent to communicate a lack of support and trust. Certainly, there is a need for effective and clear communication from all school representatives, which entails understanding the concerns and needs of our community. To that end, I want to emphasize the very real fears regarding our children's educational experience that need to be appreciated and taken into account. As mentioned earlier, a staggering number of laws limiting LGBTQ rights have been passed and continue to be introduced. School boards across the country have advocated to restrict education that acknowledges gender and sexuality diversity and to prevent trans and gender nonconforming students from participating fully in school. There are, of course, similar efforts nationwide to restrict education on race and realities of racism. From my experience working with youth and their families, I know that the impact of these restrictions is not only an incomplete education. It sends the message to all children that there is an impossibly narrow idea of what a person is and should be, and that is truly harmful for all of our young people, regardless of their identities. And I have seen how children come to life when they know that they are seen and valued for who they are. Thankfully, Hastings has been a trailblazer in efforts towards an inclusive educational experience, including the creation of a diversity coordinator position, student affinity spaces, the Courageous Conversations curriculum, and certainly the lessons on gender at Hillside. And we must continue to advocate for further efforts as inequity, discrimination, and ignorance are still quite present in our schools. It is certainly appropriate for our board members to be curious and ask questions about what our children are learning, especially when it involves information that may be new or unfamiliar. And there's also a need for board members to be unambiguously clear and strong in their support for education that acknowledges, nurtures, and celebrates difference. Given our current reality, we need that assurance. We are fortunate to have educators with expertise who consistently demonstrate openness to answer questions and address concerns. I would also appreciate the opportunity to be a resource or even a listening ear for anyone on the board or greater community who would like to discuss gender education further. It is something I truly enjoy and would welcome. Thank you for your time, attention, and continuing care for our children.
Hi, my name's Nancy Dodson. I live at 69 Lincoln Avenue. The Rainbow Families asked me to speak tonight. I'm the adolescent medicine doctor at Pediatrics on Hudson. And so I provide adolescent care, but actually gender-affirming care, including prescribing hormones for kids throughout the river towns in Westchester, but certainly here in Hastings. So while I don't think I can even add a lot of wisdom to what the Rainbow Families, the families have already said, I do have a familiarity and proximity to a lot of gender diverse kids in our town. So first of all, I just want to tell you that we really do have, they're here, that they're in our, we have kids who are transgender and gender expansive and gender non-binary in our schools, including in our elementary schools. I take care of kids who have sort of known that they were transgender basically from the time that they could talk, and they were, as you said, first choosing the clothes and Carters. There are kids that experience kind of an increasing dysphoria or discomfort with their body as they get older and mature and approach puberty. There are kids who identify as non-binary almost in this very non-distressed way, and I almost think that they're just expressing like that they just have more progressive notions about gender than the previous generation, and the way that they express that is by identifying as non-binary. And then there are kids who come out as teenagers and have true dysphoria and really need to medically transition in order to be safe and psychologically well. And I think perhaps the population that I worry about the most are the kids who come out to me in college or beyond, and what they say was, I've known this about myself since I was in preschool, and the first time I'm saying the words out loud. And we know that some people who are trans come out in their 50s and 60s, or even later. And I wonder what messages they got early on that kind of drove them so far into the closet that they weren't able to really live their true self until so much older. And so to me, that's really a tragedy, and I don't want our environment at school to promote that kind of closetedness. I just want to say, I want to share a few things that I'm getting from my patients right now. First of all, there is a lot of real fear among parents right now because of the increasingly transphobic environment in the country. And parents are facing really concrete challenges, like medications are getting harder to get. I'm finding that even here in New York. There are more obstacles to getting medications. It's taking longer to access gender-affirming care. And there's this sort of looming threat of what if gender-affirming care for young people becomes illegal nationally in sort of a worst-case scenario. And so parents feel the creep of these anti-trans bills, and it really is very stressful for parents and even for kids who are old enough to realize what's going on. I also wanted to just share that the school environment, is that a timer? Is my time
I
up?
think we welcome an extension on her
60 seconds?
rules
30
of the
seconds.
rules.
60 seconds. Go.
Thank you. I also, thank you,
Can't
by the
give-
way.
can't-
Oh, thank you.
Outside of the
I also
rules
just want to say that when
right
I
now.
ask parents how are things going, one of the things they always lead with, if things are going well, they say, school has been great, they've been so accepting from at the top level down, we feel so accepted. And so the school environment is so crucial, second only to the home environment in terms of the just happiness and psychological well-being of trans kids. The last thing I'll say is just what everyone else has said, that there is so much medical evidence, good, strong evidence published in journals like Pediatrics, which is one of the top pediatrics journals, that shows that when a child is supported in their social transition and access to gender-affirming care, their mental health outcomes are basically equivalent to their cisgender peers. And so we have a chance for Hastings to really be a sanctuary and a safe place for kids and promote mental health for all kids, cis and trans and non-binary. So that's all I'll say. I want to also offer myself, as did Amy Nichols, call me anytime, I'm right in town, if you want anything, advice, whatever. Thank you.
Anyone else? No?
Hi, I'm Laura Weitzman. I'm at 101 Lincoln Avenue. I'm going to read the first half of my statement, and then for time reasons, Mary Louise will pick up the second half. I had an opportunity to watch the recording of the October 11th BOE meeting, and I wanted to contribute some thoughts for your consideration. Some really important questions were raised there, and usually when one person has a question, a lot of other people have the same questions. My perspective on these matters is as an organization development consultant specializing in culture change, strategy, and DEI, as well as being a trauma-informed leadership coach. I come with 25 years of experience in the field, and I'm also a parent of 2 Hastings students. I appreciate Dr. McCursey's strong and articulate support of gender education in our schools. This district has not always had leadership who both understood and advocated for the issues at hand, and it is a welcome change that I know is having a positive impact for our students. Some questions were raised in the meeting that explored whether a focus on social group identities has the effect of erasing individual complexity and making us increasingly tribal. I would offer that our country has long been deeply and strategically divided along the lines of identity in order to create tribal groups who would compete for value in our social hierarchy, originally to maintain the economics of plantations as a bedrock of early capitalism. That hierarchy requires everyone to strive for an assimilation toward a white, wealthy Christian norm. Today's open conversation about identity is a way to shine a light on the truth of who we actually are and the inherent value of each human being. It is a conversation that makes those who are closer to the norm feel uncomfortable, as it exposes the truth of the hierarchy and raises questions about reality, and at the same time increases comfort for those who have had to hide their basic truth for fear of reprisal and violence. I have never met a person who has not experienced the discomfort of discovering unacknowledged privilege, and few who have not experienced the pain and shame of hiding oneself for fear of rejection. These discomforts are a normal part of the process we are collectively navigating. No one should be blamed for struggling in the process or making blunders. We all will if we're doing it right. The problem is that most of us have been taught to be conflict averse and to shield children from what we ourselves are uncomfortable about. It's why the old liberal idea of "I don't see color" was so well-meaning but so woefully misguided. As we know, if you don't see color, you are not actually seeing and acknowledging the lived reality of BIPOC folks in today's world, a world that treats people as though they have no complexity and are only black or trans or queer or whatever, and that their value boils down to that identifier. Therefore, it's a cruel form of gaslighting to then say identities shouldn't be reinforced by public acknowledgement and education. It maintains an oppressive status quo in which identity is paramount to one's place in society and yet must not be named.
Marie Louise Miller, 57 Farragut Avenue. Additionally, Laura wants to offer the idea that all schools already participate in gender education and race education. They are just telling a false story. The idea that a more accurate gender education is confusing for young kids is just completely counter to her experience as a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. She has a trans partner, and she finds young kids to be the least confused of all of us. Often, little kids ask them, "What are you?" or "Are you a girl or a boy?" Her partner answers something like this: "I am both." Instead of he or she, you can refer to me as they. Invariably, kids say something like, "Okay, want to see my truck?" They are very matter of fact. The blueprint of their brains that is formed by language acquisition and life experience is still forming. Neural pathways once formed cannot be undone, which is why behavior change is so hard. And it's so difficult for adults to adapt to an idea of gender that is new to us, or adapt new pronouns. For children, it is easy. We should teach them the truth from the start, rather than asking them to relearn it later. In addition to being more effective, it probably helps them to respect adults. Laura and I have teenagers, and we could both do a little less eye-rolling about adult understanding of gender identity. Finally, on a very personal note, Laura is a lesbian mom with a 20-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. Her son dropped out of Hastings High School and developed substance use disorder. While she would never blame a school in total for any child's path, this school system was undeniably a major factor in his struggles. He was not properly supported and affirmed as a twice exceptional kid. And he was relentlessly bullied for having two moms. The swastikas drawn on his Jewish notebook by classmates did not help either. He tried hard to get support from our schools to make it stop, as did they, his parents, and to no avail. He had classmates who, as they started their gender transitions, were tragically barred from the homes of their friends by disapproving parents. Yeah. Our district is not yet a place of belonging for LGBTQIA+ families, as it is not yet one for BIPOC families. She is happy to say her son is doing well, with 2 years of strong recovery and a diploma earned through a virtual school. But despite brilliance and potential, he learned here that school is not a place for him and does not want to go to college. She is grateful that he is alive and sober and has hope in his future. And as we know, many kids from families like hers do not. And finally, thank you. I hope you will keep the health, well-being, and potential of all of our children at the forefront of district policies and discussion, even perhaps, or most especially, when it causes discomfort. And just from me, I know and I believe, and it's why I stand here, that we have the capacity to create a beloved community. I refer to Dr. Martin.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment because my name was used, even though it shouldn't have been, and so I think it's important for me to make a comment. Number one, I'm glad that people are coming here to talk and to say what you think and your opinions are. I very much appreciate the parent who actually reached out to me personally to understand, because I think that we live in such a small community that I encourage you, if there's, not just with me, but if any of the board members, you don't understand what they had to say, rather than hold it inside of you. That meeting was like a month and a half ago. Reach out to the person and ask them what it's about. I'm open to talking to anybody. I spoke to the parent here and expressed what the meaning of something we said was, or what's behind it. Second of all, I want to just address a couple of the issues here. One is that the letter that I quoted does exist. I think it's important to state that for the record, because it was implied that I was lying. I was not. I had a copy of the letter, and Alex and I went and sat with Ms. Szymanski and Dr. McCursey to discuss the letter and the problems with the letter, talking about how gender is how you like to dress and what you like to do. And I think that many parents here, and the parent I spoke with, would also find that something somewhat distressing if you don't have what is typically gender normative child. Another reason that I ask is one of the jobs of being on the BOE is that we approve all of the money that is being spent. That's your money that is hard earned. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that where that money is going is where it should be going. One of the gender groups that we had previously was not as good of a group as to advise, which is why we moved to Center Lane. And my job is to make sure that what we're using is accurate and represents what is best for the children. In addition, what I said was that we need to look at what we're teaching is age appropriate, because I believe it's very different to teach things to a kindergartner and how you speak to them than how you speak to a 12th grader. I never said that there was no such thing as trans kids. I never said that they shouldn't be gender affirmed. I never said any of that. We can go back over the quotes. That's not what I said. I said we have to be careful about what we're teaching our kids, because while, yes, there is evidence, and then somebody else, another parent said that that I said there wasn't any evidence about kids. What I said was, this is so new for all of us that I'm not sure that there's really, and please, I'd love to see the research studies that show how to teach this to kids, because that's what I'm talking about. It's not whether or not we have kids that are trans or non-binary or whatever title they may feel. I believe we need to support all of them, but how this is so new that how you teach them and how you teach things that are age appropriate can be confusing, and we don't know what's harmful and what's not, and what's useful and what's not. You know, in the 80s, I'm from the 80s, there was a program rolled out that those of you who might be close to my age might remember, which was the Just Say No program, and it was about trying to get kids to not use drugs, and it was an unmitigated disaster, because it was a new program that hadn't been tested that they completely rolled out. And so for me, that's one of the things that I'm looking at and trying to understand. It's not that I don't think that we need to have gender affirming information in our schools. We just need to figure out what's appropriate. And again, I go back to what I had said, you know, as someone who has children who might not be doing what are gender appropriate things, like boys who are into sports or girls who are into any sort of feminine activity, dance, I don't know, what have you. When I heard that in the letter, I got very upset, because I've spent my entire 14 years teaching the 14 years that my daughter's 14, teaching them that there's no such thing as girl colors and boy colors. There's no such thing as girl activities and boy activities. You can do whatever you want to do. And that was what I was reacting to. I want to make sure that we don't teach our kids that. And finally, as someone who has gay male friends, one of the things that they've told me over and over was that what's really important to them when they were growing up was that they were affirmed as a boy. That just because they were gay, the worst thing that they could say to them was that you're such a girl, you act like a girl. And it was important for them to be affirmed that they were boys, even though they were gay. And that's another thing that I was reacting to, that when we teach these kids, we have to make sure that we're affirming who they feel they are, no matter how they act. I hope that's clear. If I'm not being clear about what I'm saying, then you can please reach out to me and ask me. You know, I go back to, I used to work at Mattel on Barbie, and we had many focus groups with little kids, and I saw how little kids behave. And, you know, one time we had focus groups with 3 different Barbie dolls. The Barbie dolls all look the same. I can't remember if I've told Amy this. They were all the same. They all had the same head, but they all had different bodies. They were all wearing the same bathing suit. They had different bodies. And we took the girls in, the little girls who were aged like 5 to 10, and showed them the dolls and said, which doll do you like the best? Who would you like to play with? And there was silence. They didn't know what to say. And we were like, does anybody have an idea of which doll they like better? And no one said which doll they liked better. They were so confused. You could see it on their face. And finally, one little girl was like, I like her the best. And we were like, oh, thank God. Why do you like her the best? And she's like, because her lipstick's a little bit pinker than the others, which was not true because they were all the same doll. And then, of course, the girls come out and the moms come in, because we had mothers at the time who were there. And we asked the mothers what they thought. And, of course, the mothers, we had a very robust conversation about the difference between the Barbie dolls. And my point here is to show that what adults think, and I'm sure there are educators in the room who understand this, that what adults think and what adults perceive is different from what children think and what children perceive. We have to figure out what the best way is to either let them come to their own ideas versus pushing on them what we think is the right thing for them to know. And I just want kids to, all of our kids here, to feel like they belong to Hastings. If that's not clear, let me just leave you with that. I want all kids to feel like they belong in Hastings, no matter how they identify. And I think that we just have to make sure that we're teaching them and affirming them in age-appropriate ways. I hope that's helpful. If it's not, please reach out to me.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Teresa, you go.
What? No?
It's not a discussion.
I'm asking if I'm allowed to make a comment. I don't know. I don't know, am I? I don't know.
No, you can, every
What?
board
Just
member
wanna get
can
a-
give a comment, but you can't ask questions for them to respond. It can't be a discussion, but you can give
Right,
a
we can't-
comment if you
It can't
want.
be a discussion. We have board comments later on, but they won't be.
You can comment right now. It's not
Let's try to keep it
allowed.
I hear you, that you said that there were no board members who spoke up at that meeting in question. I regrettably did not speak up. It was an oversight on my part. I am wholeheartedly in support of the Center Lane curriculum. I attended the parent workshops. I'm thrilled it's in Hastings for every child. And I just wanted to say that I wanted you to hear that.
I have a couple of comments, and but first off, I want to talk about board process, because I remember the same calendar situation. We had a slew of individuals show up. Prior to that, we had people reach out saying that, oh, I can't believe ethnic groups were not put on the calendar when we explicitly talked about Diwali and all those things on the calendar, and it didn't happen. So far as I'm concerned, we've not had Center Lane present to the board. Have they presented to the
They're
board?
scheduled to come in
They are
with the
scheduled-
principals in February.
Yes, so
I'm
they are,
sorry, March.
they are scheduled to come in. And so there's so much, we all know this is a volunteer work, and I know people can join at any time. So just, like I had mentioned earlier, I had no idea what the group here was about, but like I said earlier, I see a construction site in a lot of a work process. And we are hoping that the building will be built well for it to have the outlook that we are all looking for in each of our little spaces that we sit, and we stay in that coexistence and equitable process that we are all seeking. You have your lived experience, I have my lived experience. I've spoken to most of you one-on-one on my own personal lived experience. And as a person of color and as a Black woman, that I don't feel supported with teams, with a lot of people that will not dare sit here, or else they will lose their house, and just like that. They don't have the privilege to come together and sit here. and they live in this town. People that are beaten that they can't even report it because they don't want to lose their. So there's so much that I can spill out right now, and I understand the lived experience. But I'm hoping that I heard a comment about an event that concerned Black folks, that an intention created a wrong impact, and it's been used at the Board of Trustees meeting. It was said publicly, and these Black folks have told me, why don't you go publicly and talk about it? Why don't you talk about it in the board meetings? Why don't you talk about it at the Board of Trustees about defacing? And I just want to make this statement here only because it's come up again, because we can't hurt each other. We cannot hurt each other. Marginalized groups cannot hurt each other. And when we, and yes, there are hegemonic structures that has normalized certain things over other things. So I personally deter from what I call BBS, bully, blame, and shame, only because if I should do that about being a Black person, and you have no idea my lived experiences and the lived experiences of people here, and when during the construction process mistakes happen and we cannot see that, and I'm not talking for you, Doreen. No, you're on your own, but I'm just I'm just saying this particular statement that I heard. I've heard it at the Board of Trustees town meeting, and I'm hearing it here. And I just want to say this for the record. So now back to Doreen's situation. I'm glad you've accepted this input, because it's all a learning process, and I see the genuineness in it, and I'm hoping that people will reach out to her, because some of you have heard us talk about issues that we know that we have to make sure that everybody feels validated, regardless of your own philosophical ethos and stance on things. And so, I mean, I don't want to create a cliche here, and it can become annoying, but I will say this one time only. I'm a person of faith. I don't shy away from it. My husband is an atheist, and he doesn't shy away from it because he puts it publicly on Facebook. That's why I'm saying it here publicly for the record. And we coexist. And I know these things can happen. It is mutually exclusive, but there can be that validating who people are is so important. And I just want all of you to know that Hastings is that space for everyone, for all the human protective rights groups, which this group is for. And I've spoken to some of you, so you know what my take is on it, respective of our individual philosophical ethos. And I hope we realize that together and work on this together. So back to the board process. I started with the board process, but this thing was just lingering in my head, and I needed to just spill it out. But about the board process, we have not heard from Center Lane, and we cannot work behind the scenes. We cannot work behind the scenes on process. So everything during board meetings is our working sessions. Like if you look at the, pretend you are going to be a board member, which some of you should, and you do your training, you are not allowed to discuss issues. You have to ask questions here, especially if they are going to be voted on. So this is a voting item, and I cannot call Doreen or Alex or you on a voting item and start discussing about it. We will shape each other's votes. It's not allowed. You are evading OML law. So all questions and everything must be publicly stated. And we've not had any discussion from Center Lane directly, except those that had the time to go to the meetings. And so, you know, as you rightly said, this community, cisgender is hegemonic, and we have to find a way to allow that coexistence for those that feel marginalized to feel accepted. And we also get parents who are reaching out to us about the fact that this is impacting their kids, and this is happening, my child is blah, 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 blah. Some are saying opposite to what you're saying, and they're all coming to us with it. Does that make sense? But what we can do is to let them know that there's marginalization and there's hegemony. And what the school is doing is to bring that equitable space that requires that. And so that brings me back to that expert DEI input. Because if there was a DEI administrator, let me just say it as it is, we would ask to speak to that person concerning what? The lessons. We would have a to-go person. Right now, we don't have a to-go person. We don't have a to-go expert. Are you understanding what I'm saying? We don't have it, and I know Hastings, we are committed to DEI work. And so, well, we have to be committed to having an expert administrative position that oversees this work, so that when there are such letters and concerns, you take it to that expert and say, how are you navigating this lesson, and get it from them instead of parents. The parents are not the teachers. So you saying that parents should come and, are you the teacher? Are they the teacher? They are not. Does that make sense? So we need to, if you are committed to this work, which I know Hastings, we are committed to this work, then we need an expert administrator that can be the pivotal person on such matters pertaining to human protective rights. So that's what I would say as my board comment. Thank you.
I'll make my comments during board's comments.
Okay. I think it's important to just point out, one of the reasons I ran for the board, one of the sort of most fundamental experiences of my life was I grew up in New York City and went to a big school, and in my summers I used to spend in an absolutely tiny town in the Alps in Italy with 250 residents surrounded by kilometers of apple fields. And we had probably 40 kids in that town, ranging from 4 to 16, 17. And one of the most important experiences of my life was when you're in a town with so few people, and this was summers, this was years and years, you get to know the complete person, because there's nobody else. I went from being in Manhattan where, this is the 80s, there were like types, jocks, dorks, whatever, go down the line. And going to a situation where you had the full person in front of you. You got to know everything, absolutely everything about them. The houses are connected. You knew all the families knew each other. It was related to a lot of them. And so that's sort of a first principle for me. And so however you talk about whatever experience you have, which is different than mine, I always hear that thing, that I see the opportunity that every person is and that every person needs to be. And so whenever we discuss anything, I'm always thinking about that. I don't think about what I think about things necessarily. I think about the children. I think about how they feel in their situations. And I think Hastings is an opportunity. Our small size, how close everybody is, the amount of stuff we offer, the ability for children to participate in those things, because there's not 1,000 other kids trying to do the same thing. I look at it as that same opportunity. So, to the extent that people say, well, the board members should speak more or shouldn't be silent on things, I look around at, other places that talk a lot about these topics and it goes sideways. And when I look around here, I see healthy input. I see administrators who take this seriously. I see it up close. I see staff that take these things seriously, that take it to heart, And so my position is that things are going well here. It may not be perfect. Things are going well, and I think that as a board, 2 issues. One, we vote for everything. We're not a divisive board, and to a point that's been raised by several members of the community, but also by Dr. Lang, I don't want to reference Wittgenstein word games here, but when we have to talk about stuff, it's going to come out wrong sometimes, and I don't want to, even if I don't agree with somebody, I don't want that person to feel like, you didn't say it perfect, so don't say it at all, because, that doesn't lead us to a healthy place. And so I've always been welcoming people. Lay it out there. I hear you. If I don't hear the words, I hear what's behind them. And so I just want to keep in mind, in the same way that a lot of you brought, what you were advocating for, that's important that this board is also able to do, even if it doesn't look great sometimes. It's really important that board members that were here currently, the ones who come down the line or who say, that's a board where I want to join. I think I can speak my mind, or I think I can participate. I want to leave it open, because more good stuff happens from being open than not. So that's just my perspective on what happened in the past and how things are going tonight. And I, welcome and all the input. We all hear it and we all appreciate it. And even if it's not the same way, we're all getting to a good place here. I'm very confident of that. So thank you. All right, thank you. I'm going to move forward to business items. Are there any questions or comments regarding business items 1 through 4?
We don't have an attachment for number 2. Do we need that? Is that a mistake, or do we need that? I just want to make sure.
Oh, yeah, there was no, it was just the quote for,
Got it, okay.
for that, yeah, and that's for the senior citizen dinner
Yeah,
next week.
that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something.
Any comments or questions other than that for business items 1 through 4? No? Is there a motion to approve business items 1 through 4?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Moving on to placement and services for CSE and CPSE. Are there any questions or comments? No? Is there a motion to approve our placement and services for CSE and CPSE?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Moving on to personnel, we're going to vote on this as a consent agenda. Are there any questions about our appointments, our amendments, our leaves of absence, or our resignations? No? Is there a motion to approve our appointments, amendments, leaves of absence, and resignations?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Moving on to approval of minutes. This would have been from our last meeting, November 20th. Any questions or comments regarding board minutes? Is there a motion to approve our board minutes from the November 20th meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, that's 3, but I'll take it. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Second public comment? Okay.
There's a public comment.
Advisor 42 Two things. I heard board members speak of this board as trying to get it right. And another board member compared it to a construction site. Construction sites have inspectors. Think of these people as those inspectors. We want you to get it right. This is why we're here. The second comment I have is about a comment made by another board member about a gay boy, comparing this gay boy to a trans kid. I'm baffled by the ignorance of this board member. It just further illustrates how little this board member understands what the issue is. Thank you.
Any other public comment? No? Oh, yeah.
Hi, Laura Heisler, Laura Heisler-Mitten, 45 Chestnut Drive. Hastings Rainbow Families also has an email that originally went out to Hillside, so we know the email that is being discussed. You've seen it. This is from 2021. I'm looking at it. It does include language we agree that can be more confusing. I think they've continued to modify it and make it clearer. Our distinction in the letter that we read aloud was that it says gender is really interesting and includes the way we feel inside, and includes the way we feel inside, the way we like to dress, things we like to do, and the bodies with which we were born. So it's referencing things like that. It never said, and this is what we said in the letter, it never says suggesting that if you are a girl and you like to do baseball, you might want to rethink your gender. If you're a boy and you like ballet, you might want to rethink your gender. That's what we took exception to. That's a very inflammatory, we feel, allegation or suggestion. And that was the beginning of our comments back. And we agree that bodies like this have to be able to speak openly, and we all get it wrong. And as a parent of a trans child, of course we all get it wrong. But we also get to respond. Just like my child gets to respond when I get it wrong, we get to respond when we hear something that feels inflammatory, feels like it's creating mistrust and distrust of the administrators who are doing such extraordinary work advocating for this. And again, I feel very anxious hearing words like we have to be really careful about what's appropriate to teach K through 2 or K through 4, because obviously we all care very deeply about that, but there is nothing that you teach. As everybody here has said, there is nothing that you could teach a 4th grader you cannot teach a kindergartner about this very important work. I know that. I've lived that. I would welcome any conversation to have privately, but I'm not really ultimately interested in the private conversations we can have. That's useful, that's interesting as a fellow citizen. I'm here to talk about the public statements that we make. All of you sitting on a board, you chose to be on to speak publicly. I will respond to those statements because they are the ones that are informing how voting happens and what people here who are listening who may be thinking, oh, I don't know if I should trust the work that's happening at Hillside. And that person said, I know, maybe we really shouldn't trust the work that's happening at Hillside. It matters what you say here. We will respond every time. That was our point.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Moving on to agenda review. This is just upcoming meeting.
Let me just quickly clarify a couple things I mentioned in earlier. The calendar discussion won't be during December. We're going to move that into January. That's already, I think, been shifted by Melissa D. So that way we'll be in sync with districts around us. Ideally, most in January will be discussing their calendars. Most in February will be voting. So we'll be in coordination with that. Plus, it allows us time to get, I think, quite an important survey done. So we're bringing information to you as a board. And while we've been on the topic, the March date is the gender presentation. That's been selected, so it follows on the upcoming February presentation at Hillside. So board members as guests, so it doesn't become a board meeting, can certainly go sit in on that, so they see it in person. It's a design in February, and then during March will be a presentation that will be our principals, Melissa Szymanski, as well as our external resource. And that ordering, I think, is very, very important. I spent a lot of my career funding external groups to become work in, and if the internals don't take it on, the externals are there to support and facilitate and guide, but the ownership is within. So that's why we want to make sure that in March you're hearing from principals, particularly Amy and Scott, as to what's happening at Hillside and the middle school.
Okay.
So that's the main updates on the agenda.
Okay, that's going to be that's our last December meeting, our last 2023 meeting. It's going to be 12/19. So, Jody, we're moving on to board comments. I know you waited very patiently.
Yeah.
So I wanted to.
So after Jody,
set
I
it up.
have
Well, it's not that I was waiting patiently. You know, there is a structure and a process that we use. And by the way, I never liked it when I was on the board. I hated that we couldn't talk about things when people came in to bring them up. It just felt incredibly not very satisfying. But that is you perhaps could change that, but that is the process. So that's why I chose not to respond when people were speaking, but to wait till board comments. And, you know, when I walked in tonight and I saw a full house, I sort of wondered what was up. Some of you may have known what this was about. I didn't know. And I had to chuckle to myself as the basketball person, thinking of years of having a full house when there were questions about whether we were going to have an assistant coach for the basketball team or who was going to, you know, some sports brings a full house, whatever the sport thing's going to be. Somehow I think I thought I might have known more if there was something going on around sports, but maybe not anymore. But I really didn't know, and I want to say that I had the sense that probably there were a lot of people around one idea or one that were here for one thing, and I very much appreciate hearing from everyone and also the way it was done. I actually have to say I love the way something was written and you respected the fact that there was a 3-minute thing and people divided. It was very well choreographed, I think, and produced, and very effective. And that said, I guess I was sitting here feeling very moved and sad, and we go through this around other issues. And I think that there are ways, obviously, there's some things that we've started to do that we're doing well, and it's probably helpful for kids. And obviously, we've clearly failed some children and some families, and that's what we have to learn from and really do better. We have to just keep doing better. And that's hard, because it's hard to hear from people whose kids have had whatever the experience, whether it's around sex and gender or race or equity, or many other possibilities. But I'm very, I guess for me, I feel like, I guess I can only speak for me, but I kind of want to say we're all learning. We're learning as we go, and we have a lot to learn. And I sort of welcome the presentations, and I welcome the inspectors as we do this. I love that notion, and I think as long as we continue to do it in a respectful way, I think we can move it forward. And Doreen, I will say that there was something you said that sort of struck home to me, which is that we really want every child to feel like they belong to Hastings. And that's why people move here, because of what our reputation is. And I'll just end with one story. I was at the farmer's market this weekend and just sort of bumping into people that I hadn't seen in a long time and catching up about their kids. And somebody was telling me about their kids who were out of college but living in Brooklyn and spending lots of time with all their friends from Hastings. And it just made me think about the Hastings that I love and that I know, and that I think that my kids have that feeling in terms of their dear friends now. Many of them are the people that they grew up with here. And I guess I just really hope that that can continue to be true, not just for, a straight white guy who are my two. They're not kids, but they're my kids.
They're still kids. They're not babies, but they're still kids.
32 and 36. But in fact, Susanna Morrow, who's here, was a babysitter. But, should be for everybody, should be able to leave Hastings and feel good about leaving here and not just want to get out of here. And I hope that we can continue to create that kind of learning environment, that setting for everybody. But we all have to learn around all of these issues. They're really hard. And it's hard. I really empathize with the teachers. I think it's very hard for teachers. And we have to be very mindful, and I know you are, Melissa, of how we support teachers and the kind of PD that we provide for them around all of these issues, around all of the, I forget your term, but.
Human protective rights.
I'm still a DEI person.
I prefer human protective rights.
Okay.
Because that's what it is.
So anyway, that's.
Can I just make a comment on what Jody said? And that's why I know that one of the parents took offense to me saying you could come to me. The reason I said that, just to be clear, because I want to make sure that I'm clear on what I talk about, is that before I was on the board, I would have a public comment or I would write to the board, and as Jody said, we're not allowed to just say something. And when we write an email back to parents, we go through a process. I can't just write back and say, I totally agree with you, we're going to act on that. We write letters, the entire board has to agree to it. So I might say, there have been many times we wanted to write back to parents where I would draft something, because that was my responsibility, and I would draft it, and then maybe Damaris and Alex would be like, I'm not signing that letter. And so we can't respond in a certain way because we need a collective board to have a response. And so I always found that very frustrating, that I felt like I would send an email and it would just go off, and it was like nobody responded, and I never knew if anybody got it or if they cared or if it even meant anything, which was one of the reasons why I joined the board. And then I found out why we can't make comments. But that's why I was saying, if you wanted to, one of the things I wanted to do by running for the board was improve the communication, and parents can reach out to board members individually. And that's why I was asking and suggesting that, because sometimes you feel like you speak up there and then none of us says anything, and you don't know if anybody feels anything or if they heard it or what the process is. And so I was just trying to be open. Obviously, if your preference is to speak and not reach out. I totally respect that. But my point was just saying that I think my fellow board members are open to people. If you want to come to us and have questions or comments or just say, here's what I think, and I want to make sure that my views are represented as well, because you're probably hearing from 10 other people who think A, but I think B. And I want you to know that there are other parents like me who think B, because we don't know always what everybody thinks. So I hope that's clear.
The other thing I want to just say to the board.
No,
I
you
just
go.
want to follow up, I'm sorry.
No.
Is part of what gets tricky, and I've lived through this, is that, I mean, tonight is a night when there's a room full of people, but sometimes there'll be two people or one person who comes with their comments, someone else comes with their comments, and we can't get into a back and forth.
Right.
Even though it just feels weird.
Yep.
Thank you, Jody. So I will just make a board comment here just to summarize a lot of my thoughts. I usually like to type out things because I know that my own disability lies in that. So I decided to do that right now. But again, I will start off by saying thank you for sharing all the lived experiences here. And those that know me to some extent, and I know I saw a couple of individuals in the room, if they've heard me say about this construction site thing, it's more a process. Well, let me start by saying that the reason why these issues are human protective rights is because they don't have equity. That's all there is to it. If it was fully formed and if it was fully recognized, they wouldn't fall under human protective rights. Race wouldn't, color wouldn't, gender wouldn't, sexuality wouldn't, because it would be just like the hegemonic ones. So that's what I mean by it's on construction site. That's exactly what I mean. And I said that without knowing that this presentation was going to give when I was talking about other issues concerning the DEI being made an admin position, frankly. So that's what that construction site means. That being said, yes, lived experiences, and if anyone has heard any of the board comments that I have personally given, lived experiences are expert inputs. And if anyone has heard me say that, because there's no way any amount of school can actually determine your lived experience as a Jewish person. And that's what I mean, or as an atheist, which you've publicly said, or anything else. And lived experience are inputs, expert inputs. And anyone that knows me know that I value that very greatly. But as an institution, we need scholarly experts. And that's why the DEI part of, that's why Hastings fought for that DEI position. We all know that. I'm not saying anything that nobody knows. And so the good thing is that you can see that before this presentation came in, the 3 items that we are trying to make part of the budget, number 1 that we wrote there was DEI, and then the math and all of that. Because when such a construction is being done, you need expert input and you need lived experiences. And before I joined the board, there was no committee called Communications and Engagement Committee. And we suggested that because we wanted to have an appropriate committee that would work on the communication part effectively, because when things are taken out of context, or sometimes when, as a person of color, I get misunderstood a lot. As a black person, let me just be explicit, I don't get the benefit of the doubt. I'm not even going to pretend. This is America. I do not get the benefit of the doubt. And so for me, communication is everything. Process is everything. I hold on to it with my dear life, because when anyone has to be thrown under the bus, it's a black person first. So, and that is part of the marginalized state and the aftermath of the craziness that we are all faced with, which has created these human protective rights. So I welcome lived experience inputs. I don't shy away from it. I welcome it. And I know that the same way that, but one thing I would say, which I hope I say it correctly, the essence of the lived experience is to shape an equitable environment. One of the presenters clearly state that the essence is not to change somebody else's philosophical value, but to allow another person's value to exist and feel supported. And I respected that a lot, because that is what it should be. As you said, these marginalized groups don't feel supported. That's why they are marginalized groups to begin with. When I'm talking about race or black folks' needs, I'm not saying stop being white and become a black person. I just want to feel supported. I'm not saying, and I heard, you are not saying a cisgender should become a transgender. You want whatever gender and sexuality path they've chosen, they should feel welcome and supported. And that's the essence of it. So how do we create that environment is what I'm hoping that we will work together to do in a public space. If this is a private school and you want to do your own thing, that's your own cuckoo-ness. But as a public school, we have to support everybody. And those that personally know me know I'm all for that, regardless of what I value or another person values. We need to do this together. And so, yes, the good thing about the leadership team here who will do the operational work is that we don't do the operational work, is that they find ways to provide that lived experience voices. And if you were here, and again, I didn't know what this was about, when Dr. Samansky was speaking about an input, I asked, kids, how will their input be heard from their parents? Does that make sense? Because it's not all kids that they can't, like an IEP student or people that feel they can't express themselves. How is that being done? And she said there's a face, right? So I'm hoping that we can listen to this in a more holistic, broader way. And thank you very much for presenting your lived experience with us. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Is there a motion to adjourn our meeting?
So
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.